Welcome to the workbench. Today we're going to get you to stretch your imaginations as we show you how to stretch sprue. We're also going to fill in some gaps in your knowledge with one bonus technique. Let's have a look. So what is stretched sprue? As you can probably deduce from the title, it is simply sprues that have been stretched out into a long, thin thread. This is kind of an old school technique, but it is just as useful in current year as it was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. What do we use stretched sprue for? Well, back in the day, this was the common way to make thread for rigging, biplanes, radio antennas, things like that. Sewing thread was kind of fuzzy, a little out of scale, but if you could get a nice thin filament of stretched sprue, that was a good scale representation of those rigging cables or radio aerials. You could also take this and glue it onto the surface of the model to replace raised panel lines that have been lost in the process of removing seams between two parts. Check out our video on how to restore raised panel lines to see what you can do with stretched sprue once you have it. But how do we get from this to this? Well, let's have a look. So first thing, cut yourself off, nice long straight section, and then we get to play with fire. So obviously, safety warning, be very careful. Put your model far away so it doesn't get burned. Put those flammable thinners and glues far enough away. You don't want to light your workshop or your house or your apartment or wherever on fire simply so you can stretch some sprue. I don't think the insurance company is going to appreciate that excuse. So the next thing we need, some candles, because, you know, we've got to set the mood. Seriously though, it's easier to have a candle sitting here than to keep your thumb on this thing for a few minutes. And then we simply take our sprue and, like those rotisseries at the grocery store, you're just going to want to rotate your sprue until it starts to soften and gets really flexible. You're going to want to kind of mush it together a little bit. And then we fail because this was obviously not quite molten enough. So try again. Round two. Third time's the charm. Okay, turn the cameras off. We're done. We're done. Okay, so after lighting a few more candles and doing some deep breathing exercises, we have calmed down, and we will try again. All right, great success. Well, mostly. We did break it in the middle, but we did get two perfectly usable, nice long, thin lengths of stretched sprue. Perfect for some rigging, some antennas, or for replacing some raised panel lines. There's a little bit of a trick to it. You kind of have to take it off the heat a bit as you stretch it, or it's just going to burn through that little filament. Fortunately, you're going to have lots of straight sprue to keep trying until you eventually get it right. But now, what was that second bonus technique I mentioned at the start? Well, as you can see, we've got a little bit of a nice little cone shape blob of plastic here at the end where it melted. What can we use that for? Because that's not really suitable for an antenna or anything like that. Well, so I've got the lower wing section of the 48 scale Hasegawa F-16, and I don't plan on using the pylon for station number 3 here on the wing. So how do I plug these holes? Because Hasegawa was nice enough to mold the holes open as opposed to flashing them off and having us drill them out. I could just glob that full of putty and sand it. Well, the putty's going to shrink, so I'm probably going to have to putty it again, and then hopefully the putty doesn't just pop down into the hole after I paint it. Then I got to putty it again. Pain in the butt. I could fill some super glue in there, sand it down. That could work. Not super easy. I can put some white glue in there. That's going to look like crap. So what do? We take that little nub at the end and we cut off our thin little filament section and set that aside for later. Now I got this nice little cone shape. Well, looks more like a Hershey Kiss, but it'll get the job done. And we simply stuff that in the hole. But first, what we're going to do is we need to counterintuitively open this hole up a little bit. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to take this little round end mill that would normally be for a Dremel, put it in my pin vise, and we're just going to basically chamfer that opening a little bit just to better match the taper of our stretched sprue piece. And that already fits a little bit better. Using one of our failed attempts as a little applicator, we're going to apply a little bit of super glue around that hole and stuff in our little chunk. Repeat for the second hole, or for as many holes as you have that need to be filled. Stop giggling. And we're just going to set that with a little bit of super glue accelerator. Now you could use plastic cement to fit these in. You are going to need to wait a lot longer for it to dry before you can proceed. Plus also you might end up with a little bit of a ghost seam where that plug has gone in, whereas if you use the super glue, it's going to be a seamless patch job. Now, of course, I'm doing this with this section before it's glued in. You could definitely do this once this is in place on the model. All right, it's been a few seconds. Those are nicely solidified and glued in there. So now we just need to cut these off flush. Now, you could simply use your sprue cutters, but you might end up having a little bit more filling to do if you take too much of a chunk. So what I prefer is take a razor saw and very carefully to hold the blade parallel to the surface, slowly work your way through till you cut them off. Being careful not to gouge big scratches down into your plastic. All right, next step, just take a nice rigid sanding block or stick. You want a nice flat one, nothing flexible here. You don't want to sand a divot. And just make sure that those are sanded nice and flush to the surface. Of course, we're using 400 grit here, so now I'll work our way up through some finer grits to smooth out all those scratches. All right, we're taking that up through 800 grit, smoothed everything off. But now we do need to rescribe some of our panel lines here that are a bit shallow now and restore any of those rivets that we've completely obliterated. So take our art scale razor saw, we'll do that long panel line along the leading edge here. All right, so we've got our holes filled, our panel lines rescribed, and our rivets put back in, and the whole thing sanded up to 1000 grit, so it's now nice and smooth. And through the magic of doing it twice, we've also done the other wing. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of help, not only on how to stretch sprue, but a little bonus on how to fill little round holes in your wings that aren't supposed to be there. So thank you very much for watching. Don't play with fire, and we'll catch you next time.